Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be discussing the case of a young woman reported missing after failing to return home from a visit to her aunt's. 2 days after she was last seen, family members searching the area where the girl's abandoned vehicle had been located discovered their missing loved one's body. Decades later, after a seemingly lackluster investigation took place, the girl's family continues to press on, hoping for justice. Today's case is about the murder of Amy Baker. Amy Elizabeth Baker was born on March 16, 1971, to parents Sue and Mark Baker. She had one younger brother, David, and the family had previously lived together in Falls Church, Virginia, until I believe either late 1988 or early 1989, when, according to an article in the Fairfax County Times, the family of four made a move to Hartwood, Virginia, which was located in Stafford County. Hartwood was about 50 miles south of Falls Church. Amy had previously attended either one of, or possibly even both, Falls Church High School as well as Jeb Stuart High School, where she played varsity hockey. I did Google both high schools, and both are in Falls Church, so I'm not exactly sure why she'd attended two different high schools, but that is what I've seen reported. Now, I did also see it mentioned that Amy had gone through a little bit of a rough patch in her younger years, but her aunt had told the Washington Post that Amy was, quote, getting her life back on track and was not into drugs or alcohol, end quote. Overall, at the time, in 1989, it seemed as though Amy was a very happy teenager who loved her life and her family and had even recently found a passion in photography. I do also want to mention that when our story begins in March of 1989, I believe Amy was finishing up her senior year of high school, as she just turned 18 on March 16th of that year. And according to that same Fairfax County Times piece I mentioned a minute ago, she was also hoping to attend art school in Georgia after graduation. Now, just 2 weeks after Amy Baker turned 18, during the week of March 27, 1989, she'd traveled to Falls Church, Virginia, where she'd previously lived, to visit her Aunt Mary, who was still residing there currently. And I say during the week of March 27th because I'm not exactly sure how long she'd been at her aunt's place during this visit, mainly because it's later found that Amy had extra clothes with her when she left Falls Church on March 29th. But either way, I do know that on the evening of Wednesday, March 29th, 1989, Amy had jumped into her 1970 light blue Volkswagen Bug and left her Aunt Mary's home around 8:30 p.m. She made her way onto I-95 South to make the roughly 1 hour to 1 hour and 15-minute drive home.
When you're searching for cases to cover, have you been stuck in a rut where all you find are Volkswagen drivers being involved in these cases?
No, but I knew the second that I read that about this case that you were going to hone in on it and be like, the last 3 cases that we have done have had some semblance of a Volkswagen in it. And I was like, well, this one's blue, so it doesn't count.
Yeah, it's like totally opposite end of the spectrum. It's
Yes.
not red, it's not orange. We're in the blue territory now.
Yes.
So
And
next week we're probably getting a green.
maybe. Who knows? Who knows? That's like my criteria that I search.
Right.
Always check off the box, like either drove or suspect's car is a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
So at some point during Amy's trip home, her car actually broke down and she pulled over onto the side of the highway. And from what I can tell, it happened roughly 20 to 30 minutes into her drive. Now, I've seen multiple different reasons reported for why her car broke down, with things being said like it had mechanical issues or her car experienced difficulties. But overall, it seems that the actual issue was that her car had run out of gas. I saw it mentioned briefly in only a few places that her car's gas gauge didn't work properly in her 1970 VW Bug. So, I mean, it would make sense that she ran out of gas because obviously she wouldn't have known how much she had left in the tank. Also, there is this forum that I found called Fairfax Underground, which I had never even heard of before. But within the comments on the site, there's someone that stated they were Amy's aunt. And they've been posting comments on the forum for quite a few years. Obviously, anyone can lie and pretend to be Amy's aunt, but just based on the way she speaks of Amy and the case and all the details, I'm pretty positive that it is actually her aunt. And on this site, she did comment that the gas gauge was broken on Amy's car, so it seems as though that must have been the reason as to why she'd stopped on the side of the road that night.
You would hope that it's not some weird person like catfishing people.
It really doesn't seem that way. Like, there were dozens and dozens of responses to people.
Yeah.
And like all the things that she knew, the way she spoke about the case, like in my mind, it just does not seem like anyone other than her Aunt Mary could be this person.
And she introduced herself in like a post as her aunt?
Yep.
Okay.
That's like her name in, like, everybody's got a username. That's what hers is, her first and last name. She's got even an email address in case people want to contact her. Like, it seems relatively legit.
So any information that comes from this source, it's fair enough to believe that it's truly her aunt.
I would think so. Of course, always, take things with a grain of salt, but it seems pretty legit to me. Now, the area where Amy had broken down was said to be in Newington, Virginia, right before exit 166 on I-95 South. At least that's what the exit is labeled as today in 2022. I have also seen it mentioned early on in this case that it was exit 617, but again, I'm not exactly positive of the exact exit number, but I'm pretty sure I've found this particular location on a map of the Newington area. Also, the town of Newington, Virginia was only about 15 miles into Amy's roughly 50-mile journey home, which does equate to about 25 minutes into her drive. There were comments about how where her car was found was sort of nearby to something called the Mixing Bowl. Have you ever heard of that, John?
No.
Okay. So I was like, am I crazy? Because I've literally never heard of this in my entire life. So
why would I have heard of it? Why would you ask me that?
Because you're full of useless nonsense information, so I thought maybe you would know.
No, is this like a place?
Technically, yes. So I'm like, what is this? Is this a location?
Or like
is
a
it
landmark or something?
Yeah, exactly. So the first search I found was an establishment that was closed by this point. But it seems as though the actual thing that this is the Springfield Interchange. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
So I have to assume that the Mixing Bowl must be like what locals called it, right? And I think you might get an idea of why it was called this when I show you a picture, but...
I'm already picturing like a bunch of rotaries maybe?
Kind of, yeah.
So it's got to be like a total cluster of a place
oh my God.
to drive through is what I'm assuming.
Yeah, so the Springfield Interchange is, quote, the interchange of Interstate 95, Interstate 395, and Interstate 495 in Springfield, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. The interchange is located at exit 57 on the Capitol Beltway, exit 170 on I-95, and exit 1 on I-395, end quote. Now, for everybody listening, I will have a photo of this mixing bowl in the area on our socials, and then specifically, I believe, also the exact exit ramp of where Amy had stopped her car that night. So there are going to be two things that I'm going to show you, John. There is a current Google Images map of the area now, and then I'm also going to send you a picture that I do believe is from maybe the 80s or 90s, just considering the types of vehicles that are on the roadway in the picture, and I found it on ABC 7 News' website. And I will say that the area was far less built up back in 1989, and you can even just tell that from looking at the difference between the picture from, I assume, the 80s or 90s, and then the Google image from today.
Okay, so yeah, definitely that older picture from the 80s or 90s.
I mean, if that were today, that would be hilarious. If, like, just in that one photo, like, all the cars looked like that.
You're right. I mean, there's way less infrastructure there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I feel like as far as this being the area where she could have stopped on the side of the road, there's still a lot of traffic going through there.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a huge thoroughfare.
Yep.
But it looks like a lot of places that you see in like movies and TV shows and stuff.
Yeah.
Like where you wouldn't want to break down.
Yes, because it's so busy.
I mean,
like,
you never want to break down, but...
No, of course not.
Right,
of course not. You're like, yeah, you know what, today, I really hope I'm going to break down.
Right.
Like, no one thinks that way.
Glass half full, you would think, okay, there's tons of people going through here. I have multiple highways meeting in this mixing bowl area. Chances are, if I need help, this is a great spot.
Yeah.
But also, you have tons of traffic. At the time of her disappearance, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure, so there are pros and cons. If you had to break down or if you were going to break down, this seems like it could be an okay place. because if somebody's willing to stop and help you,
Yeah.
there's a lot of traffic coming through. But also, there's not a McDonald's right there that you can go and ask them to use their phone, or there's not a gas station right here where you can go and get gas, or
Yep.
things like that. So if it was nowadays, with that image that you showed, just the Google Maps, like there's tons of businesses around.
Yeah.
So if you break down there, you just walk right over to somebody and you say, hey, I need some help.
Exactly.
Whereas back then, it seems like it's a little bit more, not desolate, that's not the word.
It's kind of close to that. We're going to discuss it in a few minutes, and it's definitely not like...
Populated?
Yeah, populated is a good word to use. And the thing about it, too, is that I do want to mention, so the mixing bowl is like a separate exit from the one that she had stopped near. So if you're taking it in like today's exits, it would be exit 170 is where the mixing bowl is. So you have all these interstates converging into one. So yes, still very busy. But then she's like 4 exits down from that. But if, it's not like it's crazy far away from that. So again, I think that just is one of those things to like reiterate. There would probably be a fair amount of traffic, even though it was like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night.
You would hope so. I mean, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, though, you're talking March. It gets dark early still during that time of the year.
Yeah, definitely.
So it could be fairly dark at this point. There may not be a lot of lights on the highway.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the older picture from the 80s or 90s,
yeah.
I would guess that there are no lights on that highway.
Probably, yeah. That's a good point. I didn't even think of that.
It's a pretty shitty situation to be in at that point. I was thinking when you said that her gas gauge didn't work, I would be so anal. Anytime I went anywhere, I'd be like,
my God.
Gotta fill my tank.
Yep.
Gotta fill my tank.
Yep.
And you would be the total opposite. You'd be
Yes,
like,
I would be the one broken down on the side of the road because I do not fill the gas tank.
I bet we still got like 5 miles left. We'll be all right.
Fun fact for everyone listening, I have not pumped gas in our car since before the pandemic. And I'm going strong on like almost 3 years now. And I'm like, I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. I want to see how long I can go.
Well, I'm sure people can guess now who's been the one pumping gas.
It's you. So, according to reporting done for the Fairfax County Times, sometime around 10 p.m. on the night of March 29th, the Virginia State Police actually stumbled upon Amy's disabled VW Bug with its hazards flashing on the shoulder of I-95 South. Upon further inspection by police, they did not find anyone with the vehicle and proceeded to tow the car and had it impounded. After hours went by and Amy still hadn't returned home, her parents began to worry about their daughter. Sue Baker was actually interviewed for the Fairfax County Times, and this piece elaborates a bit more on what Mrs. Baker was thinking that night when her daughter didn't come home. And what broke my heart about it is that she focuses on the fact that Amy had just turned 18, and she felt she shouldn't be so anxious about her daughter not being home quite yet, as she was now an adult.
I think we can all agree we were not adults when we turned 18.
Abso-frickin-lutely not.
I'm barely an adult at 34.
Truly, I think I'm like, am I actually almost 30? Because I feel like it's not allowed. Like, I can't be this old because I'm literally still a child.
I mean, you think of like people being labeled an adult once they hit 18.
Yeah.
I don't know who came up with that arbitrary number to begin with.
I think 25 sounds good.
25 is much more realistic.
That's when you can rent a car, isn't it?
Yes.
Perfect. That's when you're an adult, when you can rent a car without anybody co-signing for you.
You can own your own car and drive your own car and buy alcohol and tobacco products.
But you cannot rent one.
But once you can rent a car, you've made it.
Yeah, definitely. So after Amy didn't arrive home to Heartwood the following morning, that's when Sue took action. She told the Fairfax County Times, quote, I started calling everyone. I called hospitals, towing companies, relatives, and the police, end quote. Then, at some point after Sue made these calls, on Thursday, March 30th, she was made aware that her daughter's car had been found abandoned along I-95 South the night before, and it was located a fair distance from her home and had subsequently been towed away by authorities. The Bakers were also advised that their daughter was not found with the disabled VW Bug. At this point, her parents had to have been absolutely frantic, wondering what could have happened to Amy the night before, why her car was left abandoned, and where she could be. So that morning, on the 30th, the Bakers had gone to the impound lot to check on their daughter's car, and when they arrived and peered into the Bug, they noticed something very concerning. Several of Amy's belongings had been left behind in her car, which included her wallet, backpack, clothing she'd brought with her to visit her aunt, as well as her glasses. Based on what I've read about this case, it appears as though one of the only things missing were Amy's car keys.
So I wouldn't be so concerned about all of this property being left in the vehicle outside of the wallet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because if I had ran out of gas and I'm trying to wave somebody down to help me out,
yep,
because I need to go to the gas station, get some gas,
mm-hmm,
I'd bring my wallet.
Absolutely.
The rest of the stuff is inconsequential because I'm going to leave it there, come back to the car, fill the tank a little bit, and then make my way to the gas station. But knowing that all these other things are there and her wallet, which is how she would have purchased the gas, was there, yeah, it's
But
not a
also
good
at
sign.
this point, like, where is she? Where could she be? Even if the wallet was gone, why wouldn't she have tried to contact her parents? I'm sure she knows their phone number. I mean, back in the day, everyone remembered everyone's phone numbers.
Right. So obviously I know that something bad has happened here.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it more from like the investigative aspect of it. So if her wallet's there, I mean, did somebody happen upon her broken down and abduct her? Or did she wave somebody down to get gas and then get taken somewhere and then something happened from there? At this point, I would assume something happened before she ever made contact with somebody to help her get gas.
Yes,
because
agreed.
her wallet's left there.
Yep, definitely.
So we know that, again, from the investigative aspect, whatever went bad here happened from this spot.
Now, after the Bakers had checked on her car and saw her personal items inside, they knew something was very wrong. So they reported Amy missing to the Fairfax County Police Department. And this agency was to take on the investigation into Amy's disappearance. Also during this time, Amy's Aunt Mary, whose house she'd been at the night before, had come to the aid of the Bakers to assist in any way that she could to help find her niece. It's reported that she and Amy's mother created flyers about Amy's disappearance, and they were passing them out in the town near where Amy's car had been located in the Newington area. It's reported that Sue and Mary had been in contact with police this whole time and were pushing for an intensive search of the area. But from what I can tell, that's not exactly what happened. It seems as though there was like this mini search, if you'll really even call it that, and it appears that investigators believed Amy had just run off.
Why is that always the case?
Truly, why is that the case in this situation? They're like, oh yeah, she's 18. She probably just wanted to leave. Like, why would she leave her car on the side of the road to run away?
And leave her property in there.
That is like the worst, absolute worst thing that police could have thought. Like, that's the complete opposite of what anyone who like stumbled upon a scene like that would think. Like, why does your mind go there?
I have no idea. I can't be like, oh, let me look at it through their eyes. It's like, no, this girl was on her way home from her aunt's house. We know the gas gauge is broken. Maybe they didn't know it at the time, but they will learn it later.
Yeah.
But she ran out of gas on the highway. How does that coincide with
she ran off? Like, come on.
No.
Ridiculous. Now, the following day, March 31st, 1989, Sue and Mary had spoken with an officer who worked for, I believe, the Fairfax County PD, and they'd planned to meet with said officer near the exit ramp where Amy's car had broken down 2 nights prior. Now, I don't know why there was just this one officer they were planning to meet, why there wasn't a full-blown grid search going on in the area or anything like that. All I know is they were supposed to meet with a female cop, presumably from Fairfax County PD, to, I would assume, search that area for Amy. From what I've gathered, though, this police officer that was supposed to be meeting Sue and Mary just never showed up. So instead of going back home, the 2 women decided that they would take it upon themselves to search the wooded areas near the exit ramp.
Yeah, you would assume that it'd be multiple officers.
Yeah.
Or some type of coordinated search with the community, too.
Yeah, like a search party.
Yeah.
That's what you would expect. Why is it this one officer?
Maybe because police had deemed this a runaway.
Maybe.
So then you had this one sympathetic female officer.
Maybe.
And she was like, oh, I'll come and help. And then maybe she was told by a superior not to.
Or maybe she got tied up.
Maybe she got tied up with work and she couldn't get there.
Yeah. And it's not like you have cell phones to like call them up and be like, hey, sorry, I'm running late, or like I can't make it or whatever. I'm sure they waited a little while and then were like, well, we're just going to go look ourselves then. Right. Yeah, so that makes sense. But after literally only a half an hour of searching, it was Amy's mother that discovered her daughter's badly beaten, partially clothed body in the woods just over a half mile from where her car was found. Truly, this was the most heartbreaking thing to me when I was researching this case, to know that this family was pushing for this intensive search, yet her poor mother and her aunt right alongside her are the ones to find Amy in this state, it's horrible.
It's the worst case scenario.
Oh, absolutely. And you'd think that authorities would push harder to ensure that this type of thing didn't happen to a loved one of someone that's missing. Truly, I can only imagine what her mom and aunt have dealt with after finding her like that.
Right. And you have to think, they reported her missing and they know her last known location.
Yeah.
Because they towed the vehicle from there, or at least state police towed the vehicle from there.
Mm-hmm.
They know where to start searching. So you're telling me that a shift of officers didn't go out to that location at any point and try to search that area for a half an hour?
Right.
Instead, it has to be the mother and aunt to go look. And then, they're not investigators.
No.
They're just looking around.
Exactly.
They don't have, a particular aptitude to
notice
certain
things
people.
Or yeah.
Right. So
mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's terribly sad that this happened and that her mother and aunt were the ones to find her, but it's very disappointing at the same time, and I don't know which one is worse.
Yeah, I agree. Looking at it from the police being just flippant about the whole thing, it doesn't really matter to them.
Right.
Versus, now the family having to be the ones to find her like this. If they weren't so flippant, then the family wouldn't have found her in this state, I don't think. So,
right. And as bad as it is to have to deal with the trauma of your daughter being murdered and all of that, compound on top of that, finding her body.
And having that image in your brain for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's fucking terrible.
It's absolutely horrible. Now, after Sue and Mary had discovered that Amy was deceased and they'd found her body, they ran to try and find anybody in the area or driving by that could help them. As it turns out, they ended up finding someone to help them, but I've seen several scenarios reported, so I don't know which is most accurate. Some accounts say that they flagged down a passing ambulance, others say a motorist, and I've also seen it stated that they had located a police officer that was sitting on Backlick Road in Newington and had that officer come assist them. But either way, the following day, April 1st, 1989, it was reported in the Times-Dispatch that Amy Baker's body had been found. Now, based on the little bit of media coverage Amy's case received back in '89, it was stated that whoever killed Amy had attempted to somewhat conceal her body. At least I think so anyway. Because when she was found, she was partially covered in leaves. In terms of where her body was located, I know I had mentioned that her mother and aunt had gone to the exit ramp area where Amy's car had been found, but where her body was later located was said to be roughly a half mile from that location. She was still in the Newington area near something called the Backlick Road Bridge on Backlick Road, the same place where that officer supposedly was. So kind of makes me think that might be the most accurate on who helped them after they'd found Amy's body, but I could be wrong. But it was said that this bridge was close to Interstate 395, which makes sense considering the mixing bowl, the connection of the interstates, all of this. So regardless, she was very close by to where her car was found. So at first, authorities weren't releasing much information to the public regarding Amy's murder, including what her cause of death was. However, over time, this information does come out, and after her autopsy, it was determined that Amy had been beaten, raped, and strangled. Also, it was reported in a Fairfax County Times article that, quote, they found change in the pocket of her khaki shorts, and a coroner's report estimated that it all happened within 30 minutes to an hour of when she left her car, end quote.
How do they get to that?
We'll get there in just a minute.
All right.
Now, just a few minutes ago, I had mentioned how Sue Baker and her Aunt Mary didn't really feel as though authorities had done enough in terms of finding Amy, which then made it so they had to search the area and be the ones to find her. It's reported in the Washington Post less than a week after Amy had been killed that her Aunt Mary stated, quote, there might not have been anything they could have done to save Amy, but they might have been able to have done something to save her mother from finding her. I'm mad because her mother and I had to find her. It took us a half hour. The police department couldn't do it in 2 days, end quote.
Yeah, that's the most upsetting. I can't say that. It's not the most upsetting because obviously the most upsetting thing is the fact that this happened.
Yes.
But then you have the police who are the ones that you're supposed to be able to go to when you have a crisis and they're the ones that are supposed to help you.
Yes.
And like she said, she put it together so eloquently, they couldn't do it in 2 days. Mm-hmm. And these two ladies that have no background in this investigative work find the daughter in 30 minutes.
Yeah, well, authorities had essentially almost like a response to this. And they, I believe, also told the Washington Post what their whole investigation was like before her body was found. It states, quote, police spokesman Warren Carmichael said that in addition to a police lookout, a uniformed officer, an officer with a police dog, and a homicide investigator were sent on Thursday to the section of I-95 just south of Backlick Road, where Baker's car was found by a Virginia State Police trooper. A helicopter also searched the area, he said. The homicide investigator was planning to resume his search on Friday, the day her body was found, Carmichael added. Given what we knew, we made every reasonable effort to be of assistance, he said, end quote.
Do you remember I said this episodes ago? Police dogs are not that great.
Yes, we have definitely talked about that. They can be good in certain instances, and then others, it can also be like...
It's just like with anything else, with any other profession. You have people that are good at their job and people that are really bad at their job.
Yep.
You have police dogs that are really good at their job and police dogs that are really bad at their job.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But if they're saying that they had this police dog out there, they had this other officer going out there, you had a police lookout, and then you had a helicopter out there.
How did you not find her body?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's the thing that doesn't compute for me. They're trying to say, oh, we did this and we did that. And first of all, I get that she just turned 18, but let's pretend she was 17. Would you have had the same response? Or were you just saying, oh, she's an adult, she can run away, so we're going to literally have 3 officers rather than a full-blown search?
I don't know. It's like pure hubris for them to come out with that type of statement.
Yeah.
Just to cover their own ass and be like, oh, yeah, I did this, we did this, whatever. When in actuality, they should have shown a little humility and said, it's a tragedy that this happened. It's even more of a tragedy that a mother and aunt had to find the body.
Yep.
Going forward, we're going to do our best to find this killer and to bring him to justice.
Yeah, absolutely. That would have been 10,000 times better of a response to that, rather than almost trying to cover your butt and be like, no, we did everything we were supposed to.
Yeah.
It just feels disingenuous.
And dirty.
Yeah. But in terms of the initial investigation into Amy Baker's murder, I think it's obvious that there seem to be some issues between the family and police. Police are saying, of course, we did everything we possibly could to find Amy, yet, as we just went over, her family was like, oh, hell no, you didn't. But due to a lack of coverage on the case in the first several years, there really isn't much else reported regarding any potential issues or hiccups in this investigation. Now, something interesting that I have read, though, is that Mary's husband, so Amy's uncle, was supposedly a Fairfax County officer back when Amy was killed. I don't know his name or if he was a detective or a patrol officer back then, but from what I can tell, I don't believe he was able to have any involvement in the case. And obviously, I don't know if that's a conflict of interest or what, but I think back to Gary Grant Jr.'s case and how once his dad got involved, then the DA was all like, oh, no way, you can't be involved. This is a conflict of interest. So I have to assume it was probably kind of the same thing here. But based on some comments I found online, it doesn't seem like he was overly thrilled about this investigation either.
Yeah, I would say that it kind of muddies the water when you have a relative involved in an investigation.
Yeah.
But involvement is very different from influence. And you would assume that if you're an officer on even a close-by department, you would hope to have some type of influence into the amount of manpower and work that goes into finding a relative of yours that's gone missing under strange circumstances.
And you have to think, though, PDs work in seniority. So, if a senior cop or a senior detective or a sergeant or a lieutenant or whoever is now we're not doing that, I think regardless of influence, if they say no, then that's it, chain of command, right?
I guess. I think there are some barriers in that respect, but also I think that if a superior is making a bad decision, it falls upon the subordinates to make the right decision.
Who knows? I don't know exactly
situation.
how it happened. So
yeah,
but it's all political too. So
I'm also talking nowadays.
Yeah, 89, very different.
Very different.
Yeah,
you kind of did what you were told back then.
Yeah, this is true. Yep, that's a good point. Now, something incredibly unfortunate that I learned later on in my research on this case that I did want to bring up now has to do with the fact that Amy's body had been out in the elements for 2 days in the spring. I'm sure you can guess that it rained in that span of time between when her car was located on the side of the highway on the night of the 29th and when her body was found on the 31st. And of course, rain can be a huge hindrance in any investigation, especially in terms of finding physical evidence.
Washing away physical evidence, most likely having some type of negative effect on nailing down decomposition rate or time of death.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're talking, sure, it's the spring. I don't know what the temperature was, but when
it was warmer is what I've seen. So
if you had a wet day in the cold, it could have one effect versus, a rainy day on a warm day.
Yep.
Can have a different effect. It's obviously not the best scenario when trying to track down evidence.
Yeah.
Especially if you're looking at tracks, if a body was like dragged off the highway, or if you're looking for boot prints or shoe prints or any prints in general being left on a body.
Definitely, like seeing where the area has been disturbed, stuff like that to look into. And it seems like, obviously with rain, could be windy, not really sure. That could just totally disturb any possible evidence you might be able to find.
Yeah, weather is a huge hindrance, especially when a body's been left out for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
Anything more than, a few hours.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the initial investigation, authorities seem to already have a working timeline of what they believed took place between the time Amy left her aunt's home in Falls Church and when she was killed. So they knew she was driving south along I-95 towards home, but then at some point she ran out of gas, as we talked about before. I've got to assume if her gas gauge was broken, she probably knew what her car felt like as it was running out of gas. She probably, would know to pull over before it stopped working entirely. So the car breaks down, it runs out of gas, and she's pulled over onto the side of the highway. From how I've interpreted the comments in the media, it seems as though it's believed Amy had pulled over on the side of the road around 9 p.m. And I believe police have come up with this general time frame due to the fact that she'd only made her way to this particular exit ramp on I-95 South, which was about 25 minutes from her aunt's home. And then from there, they based the 9 p.m. time frame of the car actually breaking down on when she left Falls Church around 8:30. So 8:30 plus 25 minutes, right around 9 p.m. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Then authorities told the Times-Dispatch what they believed happened next. And that was that Amy, quote, apparently set out on foot to find a service station, end quote.
I don't know if I agree with that, though.
How come?
Her wallet's left in the car.
Do you recall the quote that I read to you earlier about what was found in her shorts pocket?
Coins.
Change, yeah.
Change.
So I think people believe that she just grabbed her change that she had probably in her cup holder. Do they have cup holders in a 1970 VW Bug? Maybe. But whatever. She had her little coin area in her car. So I think it's believed that she might have just grabbed that, shoved it in her pocket and went. I don't know, but
I'm not totally on board with it
just
because the wallet's left behind.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I get what you're saying. Now, there was, in fact, an Exxon gas station that was nearby at the time. And from what I've gathered about this particular area in Newington, there wasn't much around at all outside of this gas station, as well as an establishment known as the Newington Motel. It's been stated that Newington wasn't a very safe area either. I've also seen it mentioned that Amy actually had relatives who drove tow trucks, for a living. So her family believes that she would have likely called one of these family members for assistance with her car. Her family has also said that there's absolutely no way she would have just left her car on the side of the road like that and walked alone in the dark in a sketchy area of town unless it was absolutely necessary and a quote-unquote true emergency.
So I could see her trying to get to a payphone, a more likely scenario if she has change in her pocket.
That is a very good point. Yep.
I don't see it like she's trying to walk to a gas station to buy gas or whatever.
Did she have an extra gas tank on her? I mean, maybe if her gas gauge is broken, but...
Either that or maybe it was she's looking for a service station and then she would have just asked for help.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then go back to the car. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's a little...
I still feel as though nothing has changed my mind that whatever went bad from the car.
Okay.
Not yet, anyway.
All right. After this, authorities believe that Amy then got out of her car and was walking towards the exit ramp to, I assume, try and find help. Police have also stated that they believe Amy had made it almost to the very end, or, as they described it, the top of the exit ramp, around 9:15 p.m.
Which would have been how far from her vehicle? Do we know?
I mean, I would say probably a 15-minute walk. Nothing crazy.
So are they thinking that because of where her body was found, that she walked this way and then was potentially picked up or abducted or whatever after walking this distance?
I think so. Based on where they found her car the night before and where it was close to, I think that that's where they're then basing this off of to say this would have been like really the only way she could have gone to try and find help.
So they're thinking that she walked.
Yes.
Versus, trying to thumb and get somebody from her car and being like, hey, can you bring me to a gas station?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's what they're thinking.
All right.
So then at this point, after she reached the top of the exit ramp around 9:15, that's when police believe she came across her killer. Because after this, there doesn't seem to be anything else that authorities knew about her movements. I had also mentioned earlier in that statement from the Fairfax County Times that the ME believed that she'd been killed within a half hour to an hour of when she had left her car to make this trek up the exit ramp.
I still would like to know how they come to that conclusion.
I would have to assume, maybe there were witnesses that saw her walking along the exit ramp. I mean, I'm not sure. I was wondering the same thing when I was researching this. Did somebody tell you that they saw her on the exit ramp? Otherwise, why do you think this?
I'd have to assume that it's because she left her aunt's house at X time. Mm-hmm. They know that she traveled this far, so she was probably traveling at this rate of speed, so it took her this long to get here. Mm-hmm. And they're probably maybe placing time of death around
10:30, 10:15 or something.
Right, sometime around there, so maybe that's why they're saying that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Seems like a strange way to approximate a time of death, or how to say, oh, she died, 30 minutes after leaving her car.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you know when she left her car?
Exactly, yeah.
What if, she never walked, somebody picked her up at her car and drove her that distance?
Yeah, exactly. You don't know. So I have to wonder if it's witness statements. That's the only thing I could think of that would say oh, I saw her there at this time.
Maybe. It may be inconsequential, but
yeah,
just strikes me as odd.
Good thoughts, though. Now, I have seen it reported that investigators did speak to employees of the Exxon gas station as well as the motel, and I don't believe anyone there saw Amy. And it appears as though she didn't make it to either place. And I say that meaning that she didn't get there, pick up gas or whatever it is that she was looking for, and then try and attempt to walk back to her car. It also seems as though any and all employees of these two establishments had been ruled out as having any involvement, but I don't know that for sure. There's definitely a lot with this case that authorities know and just aren't releasing. But just based on these interviews with the gas station employees, I have to assume that's why investigators believed these were the steps Amy took after her car broke down, along with the possibility of statements from witnesses that may have seen her in the area, like we were just talking about.
Yeah, and I don't think that she made it to any of these establishments because she would have made the phone call.
Yeah, exactly. She would have used the change in her pocket. All of these things would have happened.
Right. She could have called her parents if she didn't know the number of her uncle or whatever that owned a tow truck.
Yeah.
She could have called her parents and said, hey, I ran out of gas, whatever.
And then maybe they could call her family member that had a tow truck or something just to help her out if they couldn't make it there or whatever.
Right. The fact that there was never a phone call made to any relative leads me to believe that she never made it to any of these, service stations or restaurants or anything that was around the area.
It was literally those two places. That was it.
Yeah.
The motel and the gas station.
Yeah, so she never made it to these places.
No, and police then believe that once Amy had gotten to the top of the exit ramp, that's when she came across her killer. And then whoever this person was forced her into the woods nearby.
Interesting thought.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. So then that also makes me wonder too, in regards to this timeline, they're saying they seem pretty confident in the fact that her car broke down around 9, she got to the top of the exit ramp at 9:15, and then she met her killer there, but it's
Do you find it odd that they're saying that she met her killer at this off-ramp? Mm-hmm. I would say if you're canvassing an area or if you're reaching out to the public as authorities and you're saying, hey, if you were traveling this route at any time, can you just let us know? Mm-hmm. I would be much more likely to remember a car on an off-ramp as I'm exiting the highway.
Absolutely.
Than I would as I'm traveling, 65, 70 miles an hour and a vehicle's left on the side of the highway.
100%.
Why did they believe that she met her killer on this off-ramp?
I do not know. And then again, that makes me think about these potential witness statements because that's what I'm thinking in regards to a timeline. So if someone said oh, I saw Amy on the exit ramp, did you not see her killer?
Yeah, well, I mean, just without the evidence put in front of us, it's not something that I just immediately buy into.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So you're stopped on this off-ramp, you see this girl walking, and then you force her into the wooded area, however many feet or yards off the highway, and you leave your car parked there?
Yeah, I don't know. Did they think this person was on foot? I'm not sure.
Know.
And if you look at those, or at least that picture I sent you back from the 80s or 90s, There are a lot of wooded areas around there, and there still are today. So, I mean, that part makes sense, but...
Right, but to leave a vehicle on an off-ramp just seems a lot more sus than, parking off to the side of the road with your hazards on or with your hazards off and your lights off.
Agreed, yeah.
If you're driving on the highway and somebody is parked in the breakdown lane with no lights on, you're probably never going to see them, and you're never going to get any witnesses coming forward to give you information.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm taking an exit, into the middle of Providence and there's a vehicle parked off to the side, I'm going to see it.
You're going to notice it. Exactly. It stands out because it's like directly next to you, and
it's while
like
you're taking
looking.
an action.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. You're taking an action getting off the exit versus, there are times when I'll leave work and I'll drive home and I don't remember ever doing anything.
Oh, muscle memory.
Right. It's like when you muscle memory through the highway to get somewhere.
Yes.
But once you get off the exit.
And you need to think about it. You got to cut that music down. You can't see. And you got to pay attention to your surroundings.
Right. So, I don't know. I'm not saying investigators are wrong in this.
Yeah.
I still would like to know more about this investigation, but it's just the way that they're putting out this information as of right now, it's not something that I can immediately buy into and say, I think they're on the right track.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I will say, based on what I'm able to find on multiple newspaper archive sites, there's not much about her case publicized in the very beginning other than a handful of articles. But there was one pretty big thing that was reported early on, and this was discussed in a Washington Post article published on April 4th, 1989, just 5 days after Amy's body was found, and the same day her funeral was set to take place. And that's that authorities were actually looking for 2 cars that I believe were said to have been in the area, or at least in the general vicinity of where Amy's car had broken down at some point the night of March 29th. Authorities were looking for the owners of these vehicles, and at the very least, I assume, anyone else that may have seen the cars and could provide police with any information about those cars, or maybe even their drivers. The 2 vehicles seen were described as, quote, a dark-colored, early 80s Buick and a blue Ford Escort, end quote. So, John, that just makes me go back to what you were just saying about, like, someone would have noticed a car. Maybe someone did notice a car.
Okay, now I would like to know, where were these vehicles located? Were they located on the off-ramp?
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's the case, you're getting me to buy into this timeline that investigators have put forward at this point.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. That's all. That was it. There's
nothing
else about the cars. Interesting, right?
Interesting.
I love how we say the same word. Interesting, yeah.
It's a little strange that they're looking for 2 cars.
I agree, yeah.
Now, to get into the darker side of things and with the autopsy and stuff like that, we know that Amy was raped and beaten. Do we know if she was raped by multiple people?
I don't think so. I haven't ever seen anything reported about that, but I don't know if that's ever been confirmed for sure or not, or if authorities know it and they haven't said it.
Okay, because my way of thinking through this is now you have these 2 vehicles. Perhaps 2 of them were stopped off to the side of the road on this off-ramp.
Mm-hmm.
And did multiple people take part in the abduction and murder of Amy Baker? Who knows? I mean, say it was, a couple of friends. One was following another one to another area. The one behind the front vehicle sees his buddy
pull
over to stop because this girl's on the side of the road walking down the off-ramp.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're both involved, whether it be, maliciously, or one could have been like, oh, I'm not down with whatever it is you're doing, but maybe has information about what happened.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point to bring up. Now, roughly a year after Amy's body was found, I did find another article that mentioned her case, but it seemed to be more focused on some other cases of murdered women in the area rather than a full-blown article dedicated to who Amy was, her life, or her murder. One thing of note was stated in this piece, though, and at this point, now over a year since Amy's murder, police had the following to say about their investigation. Quote, "We have looked up and down the East Coast, and we have reached a point in the Baker case where we have exhausted all leads. So we're happy to receive and give information. We're not at this point in a posture to say that there is a connection," end quote. And they mean a connection, or lack thereof, really, in regards to police believing there was any sort of connection to these other local murders that were covered in this piece.
Okay.
Now, I'm sure you're wondering about these cases and if there seemed to be like any resemblance to Amy's case, and it doesn't really seem like there were any, but of course that's my opinion. But just based on how this article reads and the comments from investigators in the different jurisdictions where each case took place, it really seems like they'd be grasping at straws to find similarities. And unfortunately, after this comment made by police about them kind of being at a dead end, it appears that Amy's case went cold. From there, based on what I could find online anyway, it appeared as though a decade went by without any word of Amy Baker in the press. However, based on more recent reporting, it does actually seem as though there was a piece done on Amy's case in 1996. That was, I believe, written by a journalist by the name of Richard Amrine. And I do apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I did my best to try and find a proper pronunciation. But from what I can tell, it seems as though that article, the one that he wrote in 96, had actually heated up the investigation a little bit, with a tip coming into authorities. However, the frustrating thing is that we know nothing of what the person who called in this tip had to say. The only details I've been able to glean about it are that authorities received a call from a woman that they believed was from the Fredericksburg area and that she wanted to remain anonymous. Other than that, I don't know what the tip was that this caller provided or if they gave any sort of detail, but it was stated by investigators that they never heard from this lady again. Now, after about a decade, the Fairfax County PD still seemed to be at a standstill, with their only good tip in years seemingly going nowhere. So, at this point, authorities decided to reach out to the media to have them cover details of Amy's case to see if they would be able to generate new leads from some public attention. Warren Carmichael, a spokesperson for the Fairfax County PD, told the Times-Dispatch, quote, "We're hoping that in publicizing this case again, someone will come forward with some information. Maybe it will tweak someone's conscience. That's what we're relying on." End quote. And at this point, it was also released that there was now a $25,000 reward for information in Amy's case that I believe was put forward by a family member of hers. In terms of hoping someone would come forward to claim that reward, Amy's mother, Sue, told the Times-Dispatch, quote, "He might still be out there, and we don't want this to happen to anyone else. Maybe it will be greed that motivates somebody. That's okay with us." End quote.
Yeah, by whatever means necessary.
Absolutely. Like, as much as it's a horrible situation, and like if someone who has known this information for all these years has kept quiet, at the end of the day, if $25,000 is going to get them to speak up and put the murderer behind bars, like, I agree. I would say take the money, tell me what you know, and it is what it is. Like, you got the reward, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in that position, or if I was in that situation that Amy's family was, any way I can get information or whatever, if it's money that motivates people, if it's fear that motivates people, I'm going every avenue.
Absolutely. So, like, if it'll get someone to come forward with the information needed to close the case, I'll do it.
Agreed.
Yep.
If I got to knock on doors, if I got to hang people over ledges, I don't care.
I literally like zoned out and then it like computed what you said. Now, back in 1992, a detective named Richard Klein had taken over Amy's case, and by 99, he'd been working it for roughly 7 years. He also made a few comments to the Times-Dispatch, and one of which that intrigued me was that he believed that Amy's killer had to have had a criminal record. And it seems as though he came to this conclusion based on details of the crime that made the perpetrator seem incredibly violent. Now, based on reporting done by Paul Bradley in 1999 for the Times-Dispatch, authorities at one point had a handful of suspects that they were interested in for Amy's murder. One at the top of the list was a man by the name of Melvin Shiflett. He was actually convicted that same year, in 99, and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of a woman named Patricia Smith back in 1978. Now, it seems as though there were some similarities between his crimes and Amy's case. And a very interesting tidbit that was reported in this Times-Dispatch piece states, quote, "Like Baker, Patricia Smith was strangled with the sleeves of a shirt. And like the Fairfax case, Loudoun authorities spent years trying to find Smith's killer. DNA on a beer bottle found near Smith's body linked him to the crime." End quote.
I mean, that's extremely careless.
Yes, it is, but let's go to the number one thing that had caught my attention.
Strangled with a shirt?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that was never stated publicly by authorities. The murder weapon was never released, whether it was manual strangulation or with ligature. An object. Exactly. So now just hearing the statement, and they're saying these cases are similar in this way, you kind of have to assume that, like, it's probably accurate because authorities just said, or the spokesperson for authorities just said, we're reaching out to the media to publicize this case. Why would this reporter just say that if it wasn't, like, kind of true?
Yeah. It's definitely a strange manner of killing. Like, we don't cover many cases where someone's strangled with a shirt.
Or a piece of clothing in general. Yeah.
Whatever. It's usually ligature or manual.
Mm-hmm.
So
that right there sets it apart, I think, in terms of, like, trying to find who did this.
Right, but when you have somebody that's also killed somebody in a very similar way, yeah, it's definitely something you have to look into.
For sure.
I mean, oftentimes with these cold cases, you got to look at the smallest piece of evidence that could link a couple cases together.
Yeah, definitely.
But that seems like a good one to follow up on.
Absolutely.
Doesn't seem like it goes anywhere.
Well, let's keep going. So this Shiflett guy had quite the criminal record and had spent probably more than half his life in prison. But the big thing about him that I'm sure kept him on police's radar was the fact that he was out of prison when Amy was killed. You see, according to an article in the Times-Dispatch from 1995, back in 1979, Shiflett had been convicted for sexual assault and spent 10 years in prison. But guess what? He was released in February of 1989, just a month or two before Amy was killed.
But nobody knew that he had killed this other lady the same way Amy was murdered until 99.
Yeah, pretty much. Obviously, like, nobody knew there was a connection at that point until 99.
So we know this guy's a dirtbag.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty much a career criminal.
Yep.
And we know that prior to Amy's murder that he was charged and convicted of sexual assault. Then he was out during the time Amy was murdered. And then later on in 99, we find out that he's convicted of another murder with essentially the same means as how Amy was killed.
Yes. And the kicker to all of that is that Shiflett apparently had been working as a tow truck driver for a gas station in Fairfax County after he'd gotten out of jail.
Okay, so now we have a guy that's a career criminal, has a history of sexual assault. Mm-hmm. We know Amy was raped. We know later on he gets convicted of murder. Murdered this lady in 78, the same way that Amy was killed years later. And he was working as a tow truck driver and this girl was broken down on the highway. I mean, these all seem like characteristics that you can, line up and put together that could lead you towards believing he could be Amy's killer.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I did a little research on Melvin Shiflett and the homicide in which he was convicted for, so the murder of Patricia Smith. And one of the very first articles I found was from the Washington Post, and the very first sentence immediately caught my attention. And it states, quote, 3 weeks later, on November 21st, 1978, Smith's partially clothed body was found under a pile of leaves in a remote part of Loudoun County, end quote.
Partially concealed, partially clothed, sexually assaulted, strangled with some type of clothing, most likely a shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have two murders in the same general area within a close enough time frame while this guy is out of prison.
You're literally reading the next paragraph for me. I mean, we're just moving right along. It's like you're reading into my brain. But yeah, exactly.
Right. It seems like this would be the guy.
It does. And just to add to it all, according to this same Times-Dispatch piece from 99 written by Paul Bradley, it states, quote, the affidavits for a search warrant also say Shiflett bragged to another prison inmate about Amy Baker's death. Investigators refuse to rule him out, but say they lack the physical evidence to bring a case against him, end quote.
So he bragged that he killed her?
I'm not sure. The terminology used is just he bragged to another prison inmate about her death.
Or he could have alluded to it.
He could have, yeah. I mean, this guy's a shitbag. Like, he just seems like a horrible person, so I could see him saying something, but, like, also not want to totally implicate himself and just, like, making a snide remark or something.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody, like, took it a certain way and were like...
Essentially saying that he did it without saying that he did it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of physical evidence, it's actually discovered that during Amy's autopsy, the ME was able to find DNA that's believed to have belonged to Amy's killer. It seems as though authorities had enough of a sample to test it. But of course, thinking back to 1989, DNA testing was in its infancy, and different methods were used back over 30 years ago, and those methods required pretty large samples of DNA. But regardless, the testing was done on the DNA they had, and Detective Klein used it to compare to his list of people of interest he'd started compiling. And unfortunately, that testing ruled out every single one of them, including Melvin Shiflett. However, based on this same Times-Dispatch piece, Detective Klein just couldn't rule Melvin out based on all these other parallels to Amy's case. So, I mean, I can definitely see why authorities believed there were similarities with this guy's other crimes and Amy's murder, but from what I can tell, I believe he was, in fact, later ruled out as having any involvement, especially because the DNA didn't match him. The thing that surprises me about this situation with the DNA, though, is that Klein seemed pretty confident that Amy's killer would have had a criminal record, yet they're getting no hits in CODIS. So it seems to me, then, that maybe this guy didn't have a criminal record, or am I, totally wrong in thinking that?
I mean, I don't think you're totally wrong.
Wouldn't you think if you're a criminal, your DNA is going to be in a database?
Yes, but also, going back to Shiflett.
Yeah.
DNA testing was in its infancy. Who knows if the DNA that they located on Amy's body was that of her killers, could have been somebody else that she had come in contact with. Where did they find this DNA? What type of DNA was it? I don't know. There are other questions that I have, and could there have been some type of contamination there where, like we've talked in past episodes, like in Teresa Corley's, where, somebody worked the scene without gloves on.
Yep.
And then they touched her body before it was taken by the ME.
Who knows?
I don't know. I don't think, and we've talked about other cases, maybe not on the podcast, but just in general, where DNA can't always be the sole reason to go after a conviction.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And it's do they have means, motive, and opportunity? These are things that we've talked about before. So it's if it's just DNA, unless it were you have sperm or something like that.
Right, but you have means, motive, and opportunity right now for Shiflett to be the guy.
Yeah, definitely.
Means, you have a girl broken down on the side of the highway. He works as a tow driver in the area. Opportunity, she's walking down this ramp, or she's broken down at her vehicle. Motive, he's already been arrested for sexual assault. He's a shitbag. It's you have every piece of
other
that
than
pie available
the DNA,
outside of the DNA. So whereas DNA can be such a benefit, in some cases it could also, rule out somebody accidentally when maybe it shouldn't.
Yeah, that's true. It's a good point. It makes me think of Jan Cotta's episode.
Yeah, well, if you never got a hit on the DNA that you tested,
yeah,
you have to assume that the person's not
a criminal,
not a felon.
Or yeah, they could still be a criminal, just not a caught criminal.
Yeah, so what if it wasn't semen and it was some type of touch DNA or hair or whatever? That could have been anybody at a crime scene. We're talking back in the early days of investigating and DNA evidence, and people didn't wear gloves when they needed to, and there definitely could have been cross-contamination. So if you have all these other factors leading you towards Shiflett, I don't think that you should give up on it so soon.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know how long it took them to fully rule him out. As of 99, it seemed like they were still this guy could totally be our guy, but I don't know what ended up happening later, but it doesn't seem like they ever really pursued him. So then about 6 years later, there's some incredibly discouraging news in regards to the DNA authorities had in Amy's case. Apparently, in 2005, the sample they still had left of the DNA was too small to be able to run any further tests on it. And when I read that, I was like, come on, man. I know that back in the 80s, the amount of a sample needed was far larger than it is today, so if that had been kept for years down the line, there would likely have been more than enough of a sample to test today. We always hear about these cases where authorities don't test the DNA because the sample is small or because they want to wait until technology gets better, because a lot of times you could be using up the whole sample to run one test, and why waste it when you know DNA technology is getting better and better as time goes on? Honestly, I feel like I almost prefer to hear that authorities are still holding on to a sample because in one way or another, it's giving this sense of hope. But then again, I do also appreciate the fact that authorities were doing this testing in general, because what if they could have closed the case decades ago and put a killer behind bars? It's such a double-edged sword situation, and the whole thing just sucks.
Yeah, I think that obviously you had Amy's family pushing for answers. You had investigators now pushing for answers. You had her uncle, who was a police officer, probably pushing for this investigation to go further. So you had a lot of pressure there in wanting answers. So when you have this DNA and you have the ability to test it, it's hard to say, no, let's hold on to it and wait for this to get better.
Yeah,
it's like,
I agree.
No, I want answers now.
Of course, yeah. But then you always say it, hindsight is 20/20. So like, I just wonder, what you would think today, whereas you were thinking that way in 89, 99, whatever time frame it was that they tested it. So
right, but now, like, so whatever they had for DNA couldn't be tested. But from what you just said, like the DNA that they still have left is too small of a sample to test. Again, it goes hand in hand with kind of what you just said. It was too small of a sample, but as
time goes on
and this technology gets better, can you use a smaller and smaller sample to test going forward? And there is hope still.
Yeah, there is. And the thing about it is, though, it's like you don't know how small. Is it like minuscule and it's like, our authorities and DNA.
It's still big enough to be able to say that you have a sample.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, also, according to an article in the Fredericksburg Freelance Star published in 2019, quote, as the years went by and DNA technology improved, Baker said police offered mixed messages on whether the DNA found in Amy's body was suitable to be matched with the expanding database of such evidence, end quote. And this statement is kind of further bolstered by a comment I found on Fairfax Underground from Amy's aunt regarding DNA evidence, or the DNA evidence that they had in this case. She said, quote, the DNA tests that were done back in 1989 were totally different than even the DNA tests done a few years later and can't be compared to each other. From what I have been told, there is still one lab that does the test that was done for Amy, but you need a fresh sample from a suspect to run it, end quote. Now, I will say I have tried my damnedest to figure out what goes into like older DNA testing that was done decades ago and then potentially comparing it to DNA tested with newer technology. And I just cannot figure it out for the life of me. And I do not want to give inaccurate information that I don't fully understand. But if there is anybody out there that knows about DNA testing and how that would work, like if this is something that like maybe nobody knows that there's like an option somewhere else to maybe test this older sample, I would love to hear from you, but I just don't know enough about it to like give any information.
So the only thing that I gathered from that statement from the aunt is that there is a particular test that you can still run, but you need a fresh sample from a suspect.
Yeah, so you would have to get like a cheek swab or something from whoever you think is involved.
Right, so I'm thinking that, either that old sample is still relevant because you have something essentially to compare it to.
Yeah.
And if you were to gather a new sample, you could, look at them side by side and see if they're similar or identical.
Yeah, but then I go back to that first quote that said that the officer gave like mixed messages on whether the DNA found was suitable to be matched with the expanding database of such evidence. So is he saying that like, however this was tested and whatever the sample looks like now can't be like entered into CODIS to say like, oh, this is how thousands of people's DNA has been tested. Can you not put them side by side and say they're a match that way?
I don't know. There's a lot of words and a lot of terminology and a lot of, I don't know, but
it's a lot of science, I think, at the end of the day. And I'll tell you, that was my worst class in school.
I would just need to know. I need a more straightforward answer.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't
get it.
You're getting that from authorities for sure.
Yeah, I just don't get it. I know that they had DNA, they tested it, it wasn't a match to any of the suspects. Now what's going on with that DNA? And that's another thing, just a side note on DNA testing and shit like that. You've tested this DNA. When you test something, you still have the results of a test.
Yeah.
So how is it that, say you have a huge amount of DNA to use, and you take a bit of it to test it? As long as you have those results, can't you compare those results to other things?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I don't understand.
Why is it once you use one piece of DNA, it's like done for? It's that's it. We used it up when we tested it. That's all it is.
Yeah, you would have to think with the way technology is today, like they always talk about advancements in technology or, whatever it is, that advanced word.
Once you've tested it, why is it no good anymore?
Yeah, why is it so difficult? Like there's got to be a better way to go about it, says little old me who knows nothing about DNA science and can't even give you an answer here, but there are smart people out there that know this stuff. So I'm curious. I am very curious.
Yeah, I think at least what we can take from this is there was DNA that was gathered. It was tested against the suspects that were there. They must still have the results of that DNA test somewhere, and I would assume those results could be compared to a fresh swab from a suspect.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong there, okay. But if they still have a small amount of DNA that hasn't been tested yet, there is a chance that somewhere down the line with more advancements in technology, they could potentially test that small amount of DNA and maybe, further their potential pool of suspects from there.
Absolutely. And I think if you think about it too, this was 2005 when it was said that the rest of the sample that they had was too small. That's 17 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean,
there's big advancements.
Look at 2005. I mean, 2005, I was using a Nextel. Now I'm using a iPhone 13 Pro Max.
Yeah,
Look at the difference in technology from that.
Big difference, yeah. So I wonder if now at this point, maybe it's, like I said, where I prefer, where they're waiting until they know it could get better and better. So, they're holding on to this tiny sample that they have because they don't want to waste it.
Yeah, and hopefully they can use it.
So I have hope
for
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, in 2005, the same time that all the info about the DNA came out, that tip that had come in back in 96 from that woman was mentioned again. And authorities were still trying to find that person that called, and it's actually specified that she called on April 3rd, 1996. Honestly, whatever she said must have been compelling and maybe even believable for authorities to still be trying to locate her almost a decade after the initial call. I honestly don't know as of today if authorities have made any headway on trying to find her, but if not, I'll throw it out there. It's a long shot, but I'll ask any of our listeners that if you were the person who called authorities about Amy Baker's case on April 3rd, 1996, or if you knew the person that did, call authorities and give them that information. You honestly don't know how small of a tip could really help to break this case wide open. Now, come 2011, Fairfax County crime solvers actually put out a press release as they were hoping for renewed interest in Amy's case again. And obviously, we're hoping that some additional public attention would garner new tips and leads to help them in their search for her killer. But as of 2019, it still seemed as though Amy's case was considered cold, and I don't know if there was any sort of active investigation going on with it at all. And in an interview in 2019, Amy's mother told the Fredericksburg Freelance Star, quote, "It's a cold case for them. They don't call anymore. We only talk to them if we call them," end quote. Now, fast forward another year, and as of 2020, Fairfax County's Cold Case Squad, which was actually formed back in 1995, according to an article on Patch.com, had actually created a new website for their cold cases. And that's actually how I came across Amy's case, because I stumbled upon their website. And I will tell you, what they're doing with this website is pretty awesome. Detective Chris Flanagan told ABC7 News, quote, "We want to put out just information to do just that, to jog their memory. But we also want to limit the information to some degree so that we can evaluate the information that comes to us," end quote. Now, this site is incredibly helpful in terms of finding cold cases that need attention, and it's very neatly organized. They have all of their unsolved cases listed out by decade, and when you click on each decade, it'll open up a PDF that lists all of the unsolved murders they have in chronological order. There's a brief synopsis listed under each one, which includes a photo of the victim, the date the incident happened, the location of where the crime occurred, and the specific case number attached to each case. I usually have a pretty hard time working through some of these sites for cold cases because of how poorly the websites are designed, and there are so many that don't even have pictures of the victims, but that's a conversation for another time, but it just frustrates me beyond belief. So, John, that's honestly everything that I have in this case, and I'm sure you're probably left with a bazillion questions because I was too, but I also feel like I also have no questions because I'm just at a loss on so many things. So in terms of theories, I honestly don't even know where to land because a lot of people kind of grasp onto really random things on, forums and other sites and
things like what?
Could have been a serial killer, a long-haul trucker, a vagrant, all these random things. And then it's oh, there was this random person who did this one time, and then it's there's nothing to actually substantiate anything. Mm-hmm. Where it's normally I can see someone randomly on the internet just be oh my God, this serial killer could have had involvement.
It was probably Ted Bundy.
Yeah, but sometimes there are little tidbits that do seem a little bit similar, and it's okay, let's talk about this, let's work through it. But I just feel like that's not really here with this case.
No, I would say a lot of times, like, if somebody's putting forward a more outlandish theory, like a serial killer or something like that, you really need to lay out, like, the groundwork of how you got there.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, oh, this serial killer was from the area. Oh, this, that, the other thing, whatever.
Yes.
Like, as far as where I land right here, I'm still, like, honed in on Shiflett.
It's uncanny how alike the crimes are.
You have a guy that was in the area at the time who sexually assaulted a woman, was later convicted of murder and a sexual assault of a woman, and the way that woman was murdered is the exact same way that Amy Baker was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in the area at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked as a tow truck driver.
I mean, everything matches up.
Right. She was broken down on the side of the highway. It's like, I still don't necessarily jive 100% with authorities' idea that, you know, she walked a certain distance. I mean, could Shiflett have picked her up as she was broken down on the side of the highway with her hazards on?
Mm-hmm.
He said, oh, I'll drive you somewhere. I'll do this or do that, whatever. Drove her, then, you know, stopped off the side of the highway before the exit ramp.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like there are so few suspects, but the one suspect that they do have seems to tick so many boxes of, yeah, this should be the guy.
Yeah, and I just wonder if it's one of those things where it's like, did they not want to put the family through this because it seems as though the investigation was not good from the start? Did they not want to put them through that to just like have him potentially get acquitted or whatever because of DNA?
I think that if I were Amy's mother, I've already seen the worst of the worst. I had to find my murdered daughter.
Yeah.
So nothing else that you do from this point on is going to be any worse than that day.
It's true.
So do whatever it is you need to do, but again, by any means necessary, to figure out who the hell did this. If you have to take a swing and a miss with the DNA, but it's been too long, like, figure out the fucking situation.
Yeah, it's been a very long time.
I don't know. I think there are a few questions that I kind of want to know just from the little bit of information that we kind of have is, what type of DNA was it that was found on her body?
I think you might be getting a little bit ahead of yourself because I have one more thing I want to tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, I do just want to go back to the theories for one quick second and just say that in terms of like actual considered theories and anything put out by the police, the only thing that seems to ever have been stated for sure is that investigators do not believe Amy Baker knew her killer. And I have to agree with that. I think this killer was like an opportunistic psychopath who preyed on women in desperate situations.
Yeah, I would have never thought that she knew her killer.
Yeah, no, me either.
She broke down on the side of fucking I-95.
Exactly, yeah. Like, what are the odds that someone you know would have been, following you or something? Like, it just does not, doesn't make sense. So I can see.
Definitely a stranger.
Yeah. So what I wanted to discuss, like, essentially in the portion of the episode instead of theories, has to do with the sighting of those two cars that were supposedly witnessed at some point by Amy's car. And I actually found a comment on Fairfax Underground regarding possibly like the original tip that came in about those cars. And I'm going to preface this by saying that no, I do not know if this is legit or if this is the actual person who originally gave this tip or what, but it intrigued me a lot and I really wanted to bring it up and read the majority of this person's post for you.
You're holding out on me.
I am. Because this is important. Again, it could mean nothing. It could not actually be this person, but it seems pretty legit to me. And like, I'm using my own judgment here to say like, I think it's legit. I could be completely and totally wrong, but I think outside of Melvin Shiflett, the only other thing that I would stick on would be those cars.
Yes, I agree. And I'm just saying that you're holding out on me because you told me earlier.
Yes, I did.
This is all we had.
Yes, I did.
And we got more.
We do.
All right.
So this individual with the username JT wrote, quote, I actually witnessed Amy broken down on the side of the road that night. She had the door open to her bug. She was sitting with her legs out of the car. There was a car parked in front of hers and a car parked behind hers. I was driving southbound towards Woodbridge. My boyfriend, who is now my husband, said, I feel sorry for her. But we continued because she had two cars there. We thought they were helping her. We didn't have cell phones back then. One of the cars was older and dark, possibly brown or dark green. On my way back, going northbound, about 30 to 40 minutes later, if that, The 2 cars were gone, but there was a police car parked behind her car. I did not see her. I could not see exactly what was going on at that point. When Amy came up missing, I called the Fairfax County Police and gave them a full description of the cars and what Amy was doing. I told them about the police car. I didn't hear back, so I called again and was told they have the information." End quote. I can't help but think that this person is being at least semi-truthful, especially with Amy's aunt possibly being on this site as well. And like the way she responded back to this person, it was like she knew them, or like she knew about who they were and like this tip that they gave. So I was just so like intrigued by this. And I truly wonder if what this person saw is accurate.
It seems like that's the case.
Yeah.
Because if Mary is responding to this person as though she knows her, then you would have to assume that back when this case was in its infancy, this JT person probably came forward and gave all that information.
Yep.
They somehow got connected, JT and Mary. So
well,
then,
you have to think small town people probably talk like
right. So then later on, years later, on these message forums, to kind of reconnect and to respond as though, oh, I know you type thing. I understand that, and I think it's accurate to make that type of connection. Now, something else that I thought back on is I didn't gather from what you said earlier that these 2 cars were found with her car or seen with her car.
Yes, I didn't either.
It sounded like they were found on the off-ramp or they were seen on the off-ramp.
Yeah, and that's probably all police put out to the public at that time.
Right. So now I'm going back to my initial feeling on the case where whatever happened at the car.
That she didn't walk up the ramp.
Right. I cannot imagine an 18-year-old girl leaving her car and walking in the dark. Who knows if it was raining that night, because you did say it rained.
Yeah.
Like, it could have been a shitty night. Just throw your hazards on and hope that somebody's going to come and help you. Yep. And then you have this car behind her and this car in front of her. And that could go back to, a buddy following another buddy. They both stop.
It does, yeah.
Multiple people potentially being involved and have firsthand knowledge of what happened here. Maybe they both didn't take part in it, but you have the potential for there being a lot of actors in this scene, essentially, that could still be around, that can come forward with information and not necessarily incriminate themselves.
Yeah, and the thing that frustrates me and upsets me is the fact that this seems like a very, very short timeline. She left her aunt's house at 8:30. She broke down around 9, and then that Virginia State police officer found her car abandoned on the side of the road at 10.
Right, you're talking
are you
an
kidding?
hour maybe?
Are you kidding? That's just so unfortunate. It is just...
It's like everything had to go right for the killer and wrong for Amy and her family.
Yes. It's just beyond fucked up.
Yeah.
And overall, the biggest thing that I've come to a conclusion on is kind of what you said earlier about how you thought maybe you wouldn't really notice something if you were driving 65 along the highway. If this person's legit, I mean, they saw it.
They were a passenger, though, while their boyfriend was driving.
Okay, how many other people were passengers? Yeah. How many other people could have seen something between that time frame and just don't realize that they know something about this case?
And potentially a more accurate something.
Exactly. And if it hasn't been publicized all that much, I was digging into the depths of the internet to try and find information on this case. And I just think the more people this reaches, there is the potential that someone could have seen something that night, even if it was just a fleeting glimpse, but maybe you saw another car, maybe you saw her walking, maybe you saw
the person exiting one of these other vehicles.
Exactly. You could have even the vaguest of descriptions. You could say he was 30 years old and a white male. Even if that's all you know, that's more of a lead to go off of. That's huge. So I think at the end of the day, 33 years later, there's got to be somebody out there that knows something. There has to be.
I guarantee there's somebody out there that knows something, and that comes back to the 2 cars. I have a weird feeling that one person wanted to do something, the other person just went along with it. I could be wrong in that, but...
And if that's the case, then there's someone out there that knows what their shitbag friend did.
Right, and it's an angle to work.
It is, yeah. It's something to look into. And again, kind of just not really going into theories because we've kind of touched on
There's really only two. It's like it's Shiflett or it's these two people that stopped on the side of the road that their vehicles were seen with Amy's.
Yeah, definitely. And the last thing that I wanted to discuss before we dive into the questions that we're left with has to do with what I think is another really important detail here. And it's the fact that Amy's car keys have never been found. And I've searched as much as I possibly can, and I cannot find any mention at all if her keys were found with her body. It seems like, based on comments her aunt made online, that they don't know what the heck is up with the keys, whether they were found, whether they weren't. Were they in the woods and no one ever searched for them? I don't know. But I think, if somebody found a Volkswagen Bug car key from a long time ago, or if they had one, or if they knew someone that had one that, like, they knew they never had a Volkswagen, like, no, I don't know exactly what Amy's keys looked like, unfortunately. So I can't, like, tell you anything about them that stood out to say, oh, she had, like, this hanging off the keychain or whatever. But I just think it's, like, something to think about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you that somebody could have taken this, but also somebody could have just hucked this. And I said this with Louis Chapoux. So somebody could have just hucked them, and time has taken them deeper and deeper into the dirt. But, I mean, you had pretty much a highway in that area at the time.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
Now you see how much industry is built around it.
Mm-hmm.
I
but
mean,
it
that
still
thing could
seems
have
like
been
those
thrown,
wooded areas are there.
I don't know. I mean, somebody could have taken it. It could have been left there. It could have been thrown there. It could have been taken in the car and then thrown in a different area. So anybody that's ever looking for it is never going to find it because it's miles down, or it was thrown in a trash can and now it's in a fucking dump. So as much as it's a question that you want to be answered is, where are these keys? I don't think it's going to give you anything. Unless you were to find the keys.
Yeah.
It's a question that's just going to take up brain power that's not going to really get you anywhere.
Like, it's a part of the case that's never been found, and it's like a sticking point for me. It's like, how can they just be gone? Her change was still in her pocket.
I get that, but it's a sticking point for you. That's exactly what it is. It's a sticking point. And it's probably a sticking point for a lot of people that are involved in the investigation and stuff like that. But unless this keychain had a lucky rabbit's foot and a VW pink emblazoned fucking medallion on the keychain
yeah,
and something super particular about it, this person hung it on a key ring in their house for years, and their grandkids were like, oh, what are those keys for? And they always saw them there because of whatever reason, and they're in their mind. It's like,
what's it going to do for...
It's a needle in a haystack type situation.
It's a needle in a pile of needles.
Exactly. Needle in a haystack would be easier to find. It's a question we'd love to have answered, but...
So I guess I've started questions we're left with then, because that's my biggest one, is where are the keys? Why are the keys not with her? Why were they never found? What happened to her keys?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure, and I don't know outside of a trophy why somebody would take them. Who knows? But as far as like questions that I'm left with, there are really like two different categories that I'm left with, and one is revolving around the DNA. And
mine too.
What type of DNA was found, and then... is the sample that's left there that they still have large enough to test now, or do they think it will be large enough to test within the next few years?
Mine was more along the lines of, what kind of database was the DNA put through? Like, why could it potentially not be rerun through a more current type of DNA testing?
Yeah, that one still blows my mind. Like, if you have the results, why can't you just put the results back into a system and run it through again?
Yeah, I don't know if it's like just the way the testing was done. Like, I looked up, like, honestly, I spent so much time on this and was like, I am going to sound like a fucking idiot if I try and explain any of this because I cannot understand it.
Here we go. I'm going to contact our local crime lab and I'm going to say, hey, when you have DNA in a murder investigation, how do you go about testing it? And what happens with the results of the test after the fact? Can the results of a test be used to further test or to make a further connection going forward?
Yes, I would love to know that. And hopefully we can, in a future episode,
revisit that
idea and hopefully have an answer. Right. So,
and then outside of that, I mean, I'm still hard on Shiflett. So my first question is Shiflett still alive?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. There's a couple obituaries, but I don't know if any of them are him.
Okay. And then my other question was he ran through the ringer as far as like questioned on this? Was he pushed really hard on, hey, you're already doing time for this other murder. You're this old, like just come clean if you did this.
Yeah, I wonder, because he was only 47 in 99, so.
47 in 99, but how many years did he get for the fucking murder of the lady back in 78?
Oh, he got life in prison. I'm just saying, like, he was not, like, 80 when he got put in prison in 99, so he could still be alive today.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To then, like, go back and question him and...
Right. So my point of it was, hey, you're getting life in prison, no matter how old you are.
Mm-hmm.
If you did something else, if you get life in prison with no opportunity for parole, which I don't know if that was part of his stipulation of his conviction, but if you did this one and you're bragging to other inmates about the death of this young girl, come clean on it if you did it.
Yeah.
Was he pushed to, confess if he was the one who actually did it?
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of brings me to my last thing, which it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but I feel like there are 3 ways that this case will be solved. 1, DNA. 2, witnesses coming forward with information. Or 3, a confession. So I just wonder if they have any other suspects on their list as of today that they could grill about their potential involvement, take their DNA, and even if they just took that DNA to test against the old sample, not even use the newer sample,
Right, but if I'm like a person of interest or a suspect in a case, and, investigators come to me and they say, hey, we're looking for DNA, I'd say, shove it up your ass because you're getting mine.
Yeah. Right. And you have to get a warrant for that, don't you? Like have probable cause.
Right. So you need to have like
enough on them.
Right. So
dumb. But also good because those are our rights. I get it.
Yes. You want those rights in place when it, comes to you and somebody's knocking on your door and you're like, what the fuck? I had nothing to do with this.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would say, Shiflett admitting would be huge if he was actually truly the one who did it, and if he's still alive. Then DNA, I would hope that with advancements of DNA technology, that even that small sample that they're left with could still be tested, and hopefully if it's just ran through CODIS or whatever, ran through some type of better database than what was available back then, would be great. And then, yes, more witnesses coming forward. You would hope that anybody that did witness something would have came forward ahead of time. But, as time goes on, and we say this so many times, allegiances change, and maybe if, whoever was in the car parked behind her on the highway was the one that killed her, and whoever parked in front of her was the one that witnessed it.
Even if they didn't, even if 2 people just stopped to help her,
just give
and
any
then one was like,
have.
oh yeah, I saw this other guy with her. He could have been the one to do it. They might not have even known each other.
Yeah.
But like, that's the thing about these cases that aren't like nationally publicized. Say this guy wasn't even from Virginia. Say he was on a business trip.
Yeah.
And he just like stopped to help this poor girl. And then, someone else was there and he was like, oh, you got it, man. Like, and he leaves. And that person is who killed her. Then this guy, maybe he lived in freaking Nevada. And now it's like, he didn't even know because this case was barely even publicized in Virginia.
Right. It could have just been a chance encounter. And after they left the area, they never heard about the case anymore. But, if you don't talk about these cases, nothing is ever going to happen with them. So hopefully, as we gain a larger audience and more people hear about it and more people talk about it, there's a chance that somebody comes forward. So
yeah. So with that too, share this episode. Share all of them, like with your friends. Put it on your Facebook, your Instagram, whatever it is, because the more people that hear about this, hopefully, the more tips and leads that will be generated in these cases. It's like police said in 99 in this case, they wanted more public attention, so they went to the media. Share. It's social media. Same thing, right?
Right.
Amy Baker would be 51 years old this year, but someone destroyed the bright future she had ahead of her. Her murder absolutely crushed her family. Not only was it devastating that their loved one had been killed in such a horrific way, but the fact that her own mother and aunt had to find her body because the police response was lacking is unconscionable. Her family has struggled with the loss of their beautiful Amy and seem to have lost all hope that her case will ever be solved. This family has been pushing for answers for Amy for decades and seem to have gotten no further than they were at the very beginning. And that is just not fair. Amy deserves to be remembered. She deserves to be talked about. She deserves justice. Her mother told ABC 7 News, quote, "It's not something that you can ever get over, and she's with us all the time. There's probably not a day that we don't bring her up for some reason." If you have any information regarding the 1989 murder of Amy Elizabeth Baker, please contact the Fairfax County Crime Solvers at 1-866-411-8888. 8477. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.